the long term. I urge my colleagues to oppose these amendments and vote no on this short-sighted spending bill that will hurt families and put more people out of work. While Republicans say, and I quote, "So be it, to chop in American jobs, the people of New Mexico deserve better." I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Clerk will read.
Page 273, line 4, section 1738, the Level 4 Environmental Protection Agency Environmental Programs and Management,
from Kansas,
$2,571,099,000.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 84, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment to return just under $8.5 million to the United States taxpayers by sending $8.5 million to the deficit reduction account. You know, in November, America elected a different set of leaders to this House of Representatives. They elected a set of leaders that understand job creation. But the EPA has not gotten the message. This Congress has refused to pass cap and trade, and yet EPA continues down the road to try and implement cap and trade through regulations when there's no statutory authority to do so, and it's beyond its constitutional powers. Now, my amendment takes on only one very costly piece of the EPA's effort to destroy jobs, the greenhouse gas registry. I'm not against bridal registries or even the registration of property deeds, but forcing businesses to comply with these unnecessary and burdensome regulations will destroy jobs in Kansas and all across America. This registry drives up the cost of doing business, all with the asserted mission of satisfying the left's obsession with regulating every nook and cranny of our existence. Now, EPA would, I'm sure, tell you that they're simply collecting a little bit of data on greenhouse gases, that this registry is just a very innocent effort to learn a little bit more about who is emitting greenhouse gases, who or what. But this data is the very foundation of the EPA's effort to pursue its radical anti-jobs agenda. Indeed, continuing the greenhouse gas registry at currently funded levels will permit the EPA regulatory nose inside the job-destroying tent. We cannot head down this path. Now, the amendment I'm proposing is very modest. In 2006, the registry had $3.2 million appropriated. That was increased to almost $16 million. I'm simply trying to roll back the amount of money that this registry has to 2008 already bloated levels. Mr. Chairman, until about 45 days ago, I was in the private sector. I was running a small business. I can attest to you that this greenhouse gas registry, an attempt to implement cap and tax, will destroy jobs in Kansas. It will increase the cost of manufacturing for every Kansas airplane manufacturer. It will increase the cost of energy for every Kansas farmer. And it will increase the cost of energy for every Kansas family. And with unemployment at record levels and energy prices already high, America cannot afford this additional government mandate. And our taxpayers would be well served by reducing the funding to this misguided greenhouse gas registry. Please join me in rolling back to 2008 levels the amount of funds appropriated for the greenhouse gas registry. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the Pompeo amendment, which would basically strip all funding from EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program. It's part of an effort to ignore what scientists tell us is the most serious environmental problem of our time, climate change. Some Republicans have introduced legislation that would repeal a scientific finding that greenhouse gases pose a danger to human health. The underlying bill we're considering says that no stationary source, no matter how large, should ever have to reduce its carbon pollution. This amendment goes even further. It says that we should not even bother to find out how much pollution is being put into our air. I guess you could call it the ignorance is bliss amendment. The greenhouse gas reporting program simply requires the largest sources of carbon pollution, power plants, refineries, and the very largest factories to tell EPA and the public how much they pollute. If we are ever going to deal responsibly with this pollution, we need to know where it is coming from and have some idea of how much is being emitted. This amendment is yet one more example of putting profits and pollution ahead of people and public health. Americans understand that pollution is dangerous to their health. The scientists tell us that. We know it intuitively. It makes us sick. Let's allow EPA to fulfill its legal responsibility to collect this information. So I urge my colleagues to oppose the Pompeo amendment. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back for the purpose of the gentleman from Ohio rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair, and I want to congratulate the gentleman from Kansas, one of our new members, Mr. Pompeo, for not only a thoughtful amendment, but an amendment when he's jumping right into the fray some 45 days after he's assumed office here. I think I was here for about 2 years before I even gave my first floor speech, so congratulations to you. Sadly, however, we have to oppose your amendment. This was an account that the committee and the staff looked at hard as the CR was being prepared. It has been reduced by $5 million in the continuing resolution. Was it 16? It's down to 11 in the CR. The feeling continues to be that cutting it further would be irresponsible because cutting the funding does nothing to change the mandate that's in law of March the 31st of this year that the industry has to report their emissions by that date. Since this is the first time through this reporting requirement, there are obviously a lot of questions that businesses and industries all across the country have, and they are calling the EPA for technical assistance on how to be in compliance. If the program is reduced, as the gentleman's amendment would suggest, we'll leave companies high and dry with the reporting requirement with no one on the other end to answer the telephone to help them out to meet their obligations. Considering that, we felt that we could achieve the $5 million in savings now, and I can tell the gentleman that it's at least the majority of the committee's feeling that we will review and address this issue in a more comprehensive manner as we proceed with the 2012 budget. As such, I recommend that our colleagues vote no on this amendment and yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this amendment? If not, the vote occurs. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentleman from Kansas.
Mr. Chairman, may I request a roll call vote, please?
The gentleman from Kansas requests a roll call vote, or a recorded vote, pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas will be postponed. The clerk will read.
Page 273, line 15, Section 1739. The matter pertaining to the Environmental Protection Agency in Las Vegas, Nevada, under the heading Environmental Protection Agency Buildings and Facilities in Division A of Public Law 111-88 shall not apply to funds appropriated by this division. Section 1740, the level for Environmental Protection Agency Hazardous Substance Superfund, $1,273,765,000. Section 1741, the level for Environmental Protection Agency Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund, $106,100,000. Section 1742, the level for Environmental Protection Agency State and Tribal Assistance Grants, $2,716,446,000.
For what purpose is the gentleman from New York rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the chair.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Gentlemen will suspend for a moment.
So it's Amendment 379.
What page is he on?
It's 274. He's at the right. He's at the right.
Okay. Clerk will then designate the amendment.
Amendment number 379, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Reed of New York.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of my amendment. But before we talk about that, I want to say that I am proud to be part of this process. Last night I heard one of my colleagues say that
what we should do is, because the President threatened to veto this process at the end of the day, we should pack it up, go in the back room, and try to resolve our differences there. To me, this is what the process was all about, to have this debate on the floor of the House so that we can have an open and vigorous debate about these spending issues. Because, ladies and gentlemen, today we face a national crisis, and that national crisis is a national debt that is going to destroy us as a nation and destroy it for our children and our grandchildren. So I'm proud today to stand up and say that we need to shine the light on every aspect of every dollar that is spent in our federal budget. And today I rise to ask that we rescind and amend the continuing resolution to remove $10 million of spending on a sewer project in Tijuana, Mexico. When we are borrowing 40 cents on every dollar on the backs of our children and our grandchildren, I ask the question, why are we spending $10 million so that a sewer could be constructed in Tijuana, Mexico? Now, I understand and I empathize with my friends from San Diego in that area where waste apparently washes on the shore from Tijuana because they're not acting responsibly with their matters. But I say this: accountable for the situation in Tijuana, and rather than use our dollars, our borrowed dollars, that are being absorbed by our children and grandchildren, we hold them accountable. And I think this is exactly what we should be doing, and standing and calling out this kind of wasteful spending, in my opinion. And I am proud and ask that my colleagues join me in approving this amendment. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose, gentleman from Ohio, rise?
Mr. Chairman, to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair for the recognition, and again, as with Mr. Pompeo's amendment, the gentleman from Kansas, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, is also a new member of the body, and I commend him for coming to the floor and offering this thoughtful amendment. For those of us who have been here for a little while, the seat which Mr. Reed holds used to belong to our dear friend Amo Houghton, who was a friend and a champion for many issues for many years in this body. And although we welcome Mr. Reed to our company, we oppose his amendment. In the CR, we have reduced the U.S.-Mexico border program by $7 million, from $17 million in 2010 to $10 million in the continuing resolution. It's a 41% decrease. This action taken on behalf of the committee reduces the CR level to a level below the increase that was added in 2010 by the previous majority party, over and above President Obama's request. This is a program that we plan to have active discussions with the EPA during the 2012 budget hearings, and we'll either build the case for further reductions, or we will have a better understanding of why we should look elsewhere for additional cuts based upon programmatic needs. Therefore, while I congratulate my friend and new colleague from New York, I recommend that our colleagues vote no on this amendment, given that we have achieved what we intended to achieve via the CR, and that is to take the necessary first step at past programmatic increases and allow for a deliberative process in 2012 to examine the true needs of this program. And I yield back.
Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Being the chair, the noes have it. For what purpose, gentleman from New York, rise?
I ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman from New York asks for a roll call vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Maryland rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk number 415.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 415, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Edwards of Maryland.
For what purpose, gentleman from Idaho, rise?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order on the gentlewoman's amendment.
Point of order on the amendment is reserved. The gentlelady from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that a point of order is reserved, and of course I have the amendment as modified with language that would ensure that the amendment is budget neutral. And I'd ask unanimous consent for the modified amendment. object.
Yeah. Does the gentlelady have a modification to submit to the desk?
The modification is at the desk.
Mr. Chairman, I object to the modification of the amendment.
Objection is heard, but the desk has no modification here to be before the body.
Yeah, it's at the desk.
There's no reason to get it up there if they know you're going to object to it.
Yeah.
The gentleman from Idaho has reserved a point of order. The gentlelady from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes, subject to the point of order is reserved.
Thank you. I'll speak on the amendment. The amendment before you takes rescinded funds, increases the amount of state tribal assistance grants to make sure that we can really fund our water and sewer infrastructure. The continuing resolution really deals a death blow to our water and sewer infrastructure in this country. That means jobs all across the country in every single state. I would ask support of the amendment and note that in April 2000, the Water Infrastructure Network released its first report, Clean and Safe Water for the 21st Century, and that report documented significant improvements in water quality and public health that was associated with America's investments in water and wastewater infrastructure. But it also documented unprecedented financial problems over the next 20 years. America's water and wastewater systems will have to invest $23 billion a year more than current investments to meet the national environmental and public health priorities in the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act to replace aging and failing infrastructure. The epidemic isn't isolated. Eroded infrastructure is prominent in every neighborhood across this country, and nationwide wastewater infrastructure needs range from $300 to $400 billion over the next 20 years. My home state in Maryland has self-reported that it has an $8.4 billion deficit in water infrastructure needs. Just last month out in my district in a cold winter morning, not far from Capitol Hill, a 54-inch water main broke, created massive destruction, overturned cars, destroyed businesses, and left residents like me without safe drinking water for days. It stopped the traffic along the nation's beltway. The trucks that travel up and down the eastern seaboard were stopped and stopping commerce along the way. This happens all across the country. We've had at least 278 water main breaks just since January 1st in the counties that I represent. I would note that under the continuing resolution, states like Maryland would lose $33 billion in funding. 937 jobs, $33 million, 937 jobs. In states like Idaho, for example, in that state alone, there would be a loss of $6.9 million and 192 jobs, and this at a time when we need to do real job creation. Overall, the continuing resolution would see a loss of about of at least $1.4 billion in funds from wastewater and water treatment to the tune of 39,253 jobs at a time when the economy is really staggering. And so I would strongly urge consideration of this amendment, and whether or not it's done in this continuing resolution, the fact is that our water infrastructure is failing. It's failing all across the country. We have needs that are unmet. Local communities cannot meet those needs, and it's really incumbent on us to improve the nation's water infrastructure so that we improve our competitiveness and we ensure that we have clean drinking water. I would not like any other community across the country to have to do what I've done 3 times just during this last year in boiling every single bit of water that I use because of our failing infrastructure. And this isn't just about my community in Maryland, it's about communities across the country. And I think if anything in this continuing resolution, we need to be thinking about economic development and job creation. And the resolution in front of us does exactly the opposite. It takes millions of dollars away from communities for wastewater and water infrastructure and ensures that we won't be competitive over this next century. So I would urge strong consideration of the resolution, and with that I would yield the balance of my time.
Back.
Continue to reserve my point of order.
Gentleman from Idaho continues to reserve a point of order. For what purpose, gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to be on the record in strongly agreeing with the concept of the gentlewoman's amendment to add $200 million to state and local grants. Our congressional districts are on either side of the Potomac River. We can also see the Blue Plains sewage treatment plant. Now, we've made strides in cleaning up the Potomac River, which all of us can see and most of us cross every day, but much work still lies ahead. This bill's cuts to state and local infrastructure grants will undermine the progress that we have made on this river and will cripple state and local government efforts throughout the country. The Republican bill slashes the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds by $2 billion, or 56%, reducing the number of wastewater and drinking water projects by about 750 nationwide. Now, the needs of our nation's aging water infrastructure exceed $660 billion. This would also be a missed opportunity to add thousands of engineering, construction, and other support service jobs if we cut these programs. Additionally, the bill includes an undesignated $300 million rescission to EPA already that will most likely also impact these revolving funds. So the gentlelady's amendment does have great merit, albeit technically it may be out of order. It should be offered because it addresses a very important problem with this continuing resolution. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman, no.
Mr. Chairman, I must insist on my point of order. The amendment proposes to amend portions of the bill not yet read. The amendment may not be considered en bloc under Clause 2F of Rule 21 because the amendment proposes to increase a rescission to offset an increase in an appropriation. And I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule. To be considered en bloc, pursuant to Clause 2F of Rule 21, an amendment must propose only to transfer appropriations among objects in the bill. Because the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Maryland proposes also another kind of change in the bill, namely to increase the amount of a rescission, it may not avail itself of Clause 2F to address portions of the bill not yet read. Or the point of order is sustained, and the amendment is out of order. The clerk will read. For what purpose, gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to take this opportunity to enter into a colloquy with Subcommittee Chairman Simpson, and I'm wondering if the gentleman would be willing to engage in a colloquy with me concerning the climate change provision in the bill.
I'd be happy to.
I want to ask the gentleman, first of all, if he could explain Section 1746 of the bill to me.
I'd be happy to. Section 1746 hits the pause button on the EPA's efforts to regulate greenhouse gas emissions because of what I think are unfounded fears about global climate change. As the Chairman knows, and as Mr. Whitfield knows, over the last 2 years, EPA Administrator Jackson has been very busy creating an enormous body of regulations on greenhouse gas emissions. These regulations will cost jobs, drive up energy costs, and further imperil the American economy. EPA's greenhouse gas regulations need to be stopped in their tracks, and that's what Section 1746 does. It provides a timeout for the balance of this fiscal year, during which time EPA will be prohibited from acting on them or enforcing them. Section 1746 is intended to put a halt to the regulations that we feel will harm this economy. It is not intended to affect permitting or other matters unrelated to greenhouse gas emissions, such as construction starts or permit approvals.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I do agree with you wholeheartedly. And I might also add that Congress and the U.S. Senate have specifically addressed this issue on 3 separate occasions, and on every one of those 3 occasions had said no to EPA regulation. I might also add that last week we had a hearing with Administrator Jackson, and Mr. Green, our colleague from Texas on the Democratic side, asked her a question, and he said, "My question is this: what happens if only the United States acts to reduce these emissions, while major emitters like China or India do not take action, do not follow suit? Can we really address climate change without strong mandatory reductions by other major emitters around the world?" And Ms. Jackson, the Administrator of the EPA, said, "We will not ultimately be able to change the amount of CO2 that is accumulating in the atmosphere alone." So I would say to you, Mr. Chairman, that EPA's regulations will lead to higher costs for the coal industry, the oil industry, and natural gas industries that comprise 85% of America's energy mix, burdening both individuals and businesses, and most important of all, destroying jobs. So let me ask the gentleman, is this a debate about global warming science?
No, it's not even necessary to be a climate change skeptic to be an EPA greenhouse gas regulation skeptic. These regulations are all economic pain for little, if any, environmental gain. EPA can only regulate American companies, and we know that China already emits more carbon dioxide than we do. Its rate of emissions growth is many times faster than ours, and the Chinese government has repeatedly made clear that they will never impose such job-destroying regulatory measures on themselves. Even Administrator Lisa Jackson, as you said, has concluded that unilateral action would have little or negligible impact on further temperatures.
Thank you, and I do want to mention that the Committee on Energy and Commerce has released a discussion draft on exactly this same issue called the Energy Tax Prevention Act that would block EPA's global warming agenda under the Clean Air Act. The bill does not weaken the Clean Air Act, however. It would have no effect on the agency's ongoing efforts to deal with smog, soot, lead, mercury, and all the other pollutants that have been addressed under the Clean Air Act. It is simply a bill to stop the agency and bureaucrats from issuing regulations absent congressional approval. As our former Chairman John Dingell said, avoiding the glorious mess is what we would be doing, because the Clean Air Act was never designed to regulate greenhouse gases. As it is, EPA's global warming regulatory agenda, which is just beginning to roll out, is so open-ended that it is already having a chilling effect on investment and job creation. And the longer it moves forward, the more domestic manufacturing jobs will be forced overseas to countries not similarly burdened.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
When do you expect Congress to act on the Energy Tax Prevention Act?
Well, we've already had our first hearing, which was February the 9th. We've heard from a wide range of industries about the job creation issue, and I expect that we'll be moving this legislation within the next month and a half.
I thank the gentleman.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Thank you.
What purpose, gentleman from Virginia, rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, in light of the last colloquy, I find it necessary to say a few points about this underlying bill. It contains language that stops EPA from limiting greenhouse gas emissions for the term of the continuing resolution through the end of fiscal year 2011. First, let me point out that this issue should not be debated on an appropriations bill that has received 0 days in the Appropriations Committee for debate. I do understand that the Energy and Commerce authorizers are working this issue through a regular order process, but this is anything but regular order. Not that we would necessarily agree on the language that they're working on. But the reason you don't deal with complicated policy issues in 8 lines of bill text is because often the only thing you achieve is unintended bad consequences. In this instance, I believe that is exactly what has happened. EPA has a new permitting program that is currently in place as of January. It is to be implemented by both the states and EPA. There would be serious implications from this CR language, since new and modified large facilities are now required by law to hold greenhouse gas permits before construction, and the language would prevent federal and state permitting authority to take action to issue the permits. This would subject large facilities to legal challenges from citizens for failing to obtain permits, and will lead to construction delays and effectively eliminate thousands of American jobs. This is going to be held up in the courts indefinitely because of this language. We've heard the arguments that these regulations will stop power plants and refineries from other big industry from creating jobs. But EPA's regulations encourage companies to make major new investments and to find cleaner ways to do business. This language is an actual assault on jobs. The chair of the Republican Energy and Commerce Committee stated last week at a hearing, since in the last colloquy the Chinese government was mentioned, he stated that, and I quote, "The Chinese government and other competitors have no intention of burdening and raising the cost of doing business for their manufacturers and energy producers the way EPA plans to do here in America." Now, Mr. Chairman, to suggest that we should be taking our cues on public health and environmental policies from China, the People's Republic of China, exposes a majority party that is clearly on the side of industry but not of their constituents. This language is not about deficit reduction. It's a free pass to allow certain industries to pollute at whatever damage to the public health, to whatever level they choose to pollute. We know that pollution is dangerous to the public health. We know that EPA has a legislative responsibility to limit that pollution, and yet this language would gut EPA's legal responsibility to carry out that legislation. I'll yield back my time at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia, member of the committee, rise?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your attentiveness to this process. I know it's laborious. And I want to draw attention. I want to go back just a few steps here when we were listening to an amendment brought to us by my good friend from New York, Mr. Reed. As we're going through this process, there are those who have been working extremely hard, the Appropriations Committee and members all across this House. And Mr. Reed dug very deep, and he found something that I think all of us wanted to see, something that was exposed that the American people have pointed out clearly, that the federal government has been spending money where it does not need to be spending money. Think about where we are as a nation. $14 trillion in debt. Unemployment unacceptable. GDP dropping. $1.5 trillion of a deficit, which is almost 150% of what the federal government takes in. Think about where we are. And then children, upon conception, you ask any economist, they'll vary somewhere between $42,000 to $47,000 of debt inherited upon conception. And yet, Mr. Reed, he points out here today a great find, that this government is funding a Tijuana sewer rehabilitation project. Something about that just stinks. And I would hope that this House, that Americans all across this country, that members of this House would see that just $10 million being funded for a rehabilitation project of a sewer facility in Mexico, yet we're at this position of this fiscal House being out of order and in disorder. I would hope that this House would see and recognize that this simple amendment, only $10 million, a small amount compared to that $1.5 trillion deficit, is worthy of a yes vote of amending out of this CR, and that we would send a message to the American people. It doesn't matter if it's $1, $10 million, $1 billion. If it's unnecessary funding coming from this government, we're going to get it out and get this fiscal House back in order. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Chairman yields back. The clerk will read.
Page 275, line 4. The matter pertaining to grants to communities to develop plans and implement projects which reduce greenhouse gas emissions shall not apply to funds appropriated by this division. Section 1744. The amounts authorized to transfer under the heading Environmental Protection Agency, Administrative Provisions, Environmental Protection Agency, shall be applied to funds appropriated by this division by substituting $225 million for $475 million. Section 1745, the unobligated balances for the Environmental Protection Agency, $300 million is rescinded. Section 1746, none of the funds made available to the Environmental Protection Agency may be expended, denying approval of state implementation plans or permits because of the emissions of greenhouse gases.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment number 521 at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 521, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Braley of Iowa.
For what purpose, gentleman from Idaho, rise?
I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman from Idaho reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All day we've been hearing a lot of talk about job-killing regulations, but, Mr. Chairman, Section 1746 is a job-killing statute that would block implementation of the renewable fuel standard that was established just 4 years ago. The Braley Amendment would allow the renewable fuel standard to move forward and allow this burgeoning industry, which is reducing our dependence on foreign oil and creating thousands of jobs all over the country, to move forward. The continuing resolution prevents the renewable fuels standard from promoting clean, renewable, homegrown fuel that reduces our dependence on foreign oil. Prior to the RFS, my state of Iowa produced less than 1 billion gallons of ethanol annually, and in large part because of its implementation, we now produce more than 3.5 billion gallons per year. Ethanol and biodiesel support nearly 49,000 jobs throughout the Iowa economy. This accounts for nearly $550 million in state tax revenue. Without the renewable fuel standard, we would take a huge step backwards, potentially having a devastating impact on rural economies across the country in every congressional district. The RFS promotes biofuels by ensuring that transportation fuel sold in the United States contains certain volumes of renewable fuels, including advanced biofuels, cellulosic biofuel, and biomass-based diesel. That includes advanced biofuels, including ethanol from waste material, from crop residue, vegetative waste, animal waste, food waste, yard waste, biomass-based diesel, biogas, and butanol. The RFS promotes biofuels and is supported by the American Coalition for Ethanol, Growth Energy, the National Corn Growers Association, and the Renewable Fuels Association, and this particular legislation was described by the American Advanced Ethanol Council as language that would defund efforts to implement the RFS. The required volume of each type of fuel is established annually by the EPA, and this summer, EPA needs to propose the volume requirements for calendar year 2012. But the Republican provision in this section would prevent EPA from doing so. If EPA can't set the volume requirement, then RFS won't function next year, and renewable fuel producers all across the country are counting on these requirements. In fact, Mr. Chairman, in your area, there are two plants, White Plains Energy in Plainview and Hereford Renewable Energy and White Energy in Hereford, that will be affected if this provision becomes law. And in fact, the gentleman from Idaho has Pacific Ethanol in Burley, a 50 million gallon producer, and Idaho Sustainable Energy, which is on the front edge of biofuels with algal biodiesel, in Glens Ferry, Idaho, which will be impacted if this provision becomes law. And so instead of investing in certainty that allows these producers to move forward, this provision would pull the rug from farmers and refiners all across the country. That's why I urge my colleagues to oppose this flawed funding language and support my amendment to ensure the renewable fuel standard is allowed to move forward. It's a bad policy to have job-killing statutory provisions that are going to increase our dependence on foreign oil and move us backward, not forward, in the important area of bioenergy. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Idaho continue to reserve his point of order. Gentleman, for what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa, member of the committee, rise?
To strike the last word, please.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the gentleman's concern on Section 1746 of the continuing resolution that some people think would negatively impact renewable fuel standard. That rider in the bill specifically prohibits the EPA from regulating greenhouse gas emissions from stationary sources. However, reports that this provision will also block EPA from setting standards for the 2012 Renewable Fuel Standard are totally unfounded. And the Energy and Commerce Committee confirms this. Everyone else, and the gentleman I know used to be a member of that committee. I think it's really important to clarify that the rider in the CR is narrowly focused on EPA's new stationary source permitting authority and does not affect EPA's renewable fuels program. Under the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act, which was referred to, Congress expressly stated that renewable fuel standard does not, and I say not, constitute regulation of greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. The fundamental purpose of the Renewable Fuel Standard is to ensure our nation's energy security and to reduce our dependence on foreign sources of oil while providing a valuable incentive for the production of agriculture. As an Iowan, I understand the vast importance of agriculture to our economy by creating thousands of good-paying jobs and contributing numerous economic benefits to our rural communities. And I understand concerns that may have been expressed. However, it is very clear that the Renewable Fuel Standard falls outside EPA's rulemaking authority addressing climate change, and I want to assure my colleagues and the people of Iowa that this legislation will not affect the Renewable Fuel Standard or bring an end to the program, as some have erroneously suggested. Mr. Chairman, I mean, rules have already been written. Anything in this bill is prospective. We already have the standard in place, and this does not affect that anyway. And I find it interesting that people would now talk. I mean, in the Senate, Senator Rockefeller, a Democrat over there, and I hate to see this be politicized because it should not be a political issue, but the Democrat senator from West Virginia has this identical language, and no one has said anything about that. He wants for 2 years to have a prohibition. The Energy and Commerce Committee is having debates as to making it permanent as far as the prohibition, and I have not heard any concerns about that. So it is, I think, very unfortunate that some information is being put forth on the floor of the House here that is not true. The Energy and Commerce Committee has said over and over again that this does not affect renewable fuel standards, will have no impact as far as ethanol is concerned. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Idaho continues to reserve his point of order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington
I move to strike the requisite number of words,
and I yield
to
for 5 minutes.
Gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Braley, for the purposes of responding.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The problem with the language as drafted, Mr. Chairman, is that it is so broad and poorly drafted that it does threaten the renewable fuel standard, which is why all of those renewable energy advocate groups that I mentioned in my remarks are in support of the amendment that I've offered. The RFS promotes biofuels by ensuring that transportation fuel sold in the United States contains the requisite number of volume for each type of fuel that's established annually. And this summer, the EPA has to make sure that those standards are identified for each one of the various categories. But if they don't have the required guidance available to them because of the confusing language that's currently in this provision, it's going to create confusion, and those same industries that waited and waited and waited for a tax extenders package to be passed at the end of the last Congress are going to have the same type of uncertainty governing their investment decisions moving forward, which is why those groups that I mentioned earlier are so concerned about this matter and are in support of the Braley Amendment. They are Growth Energy, the National Corn Growers Association, the American Coalition for Ethanol, the Renewable Fuels Association, and the Advanced Ethanol Council. if the Advanced Ethanol Council believes that this language is so vague that it would defund efforts to implement the RFS, that's not me speaking. That's the very groups that would be subject to regulation by the EPA. And that's why this amendment is important, to clarify that that is not within the scope of EPA's powers. And I would yield back to the gentleman from Washington.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from Idaho.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman continues to reserve a point of order and is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield to the gentleman from Iowa.
I thank the gentleman from Idaho. You know, if there are people concerned about this, why didn't they come to us and talk to us before? We talk about the different groups out there, and that's because they've been given bad information that's not true. It is clear from the 2007 bill, and if someone would read it around here, they would understand that the renewable fuel standard is not affected by this. It is specifically outside the jurisdiction of what we're talking about. And so to make any assertion otherwise is simply giving erroneous information purposely on the floor. And that's very, very unfortunate, because you do have people that are being told something that is not true, and now they're getting all worked up about it. It's, I think, very, very unfortunate. We had a meeting this last week about Iowa delegation talking to each other. If you have concerns, why don't you bring it forth so we can take care of the problem? If you want to have the amendment, I would have supported it, but it's not needed. It is absolutely fictitious, this idea that this is somehow going to affect the renewable fuel standard. And I think it's very unfortunate that this issue has become something that has been dreamt up for other reasons, I think. That's very, very unfortunate, because we should need to work together for energy independence in this country and to lessen our dependence on foreign sources of energy. And I thank the gentleman. I yield back to him.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation in an appropriation bill, and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriation bill shall not be in order if changing existing law. The amendment gives direction in effect. I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule. The Chair finds that Section 1746 of the bill contains a legislative limitation on the use of funds. Such a provision may be properly amended by a non-legislative exception or by a germane, merely perfecting change. The amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa, rather than merely exempting Section 211(0) of the Clean Air Act from the terms of the limitation, seeks to impart direction to the EPA administrator with regard to the application of that section of the Clean Air Act. The amendment, therefore, constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. The point of order is sustained. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 193 by Ms. Loomis of Wyoming, Amendment number 338 by Mr. Moran of Virginia, Amendment number 376 by Mr. Flake of Arizona, Amendment number 884 by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas, and Amendment number 379 by Mr. Reed of New York. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 193, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Loomis, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 193, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mrs. Loomis of Wyoming.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
More votes now on amendments to a measure to fund the federal government for the rest of this fiscal year. House Republicans want to cut about $60 billion from fiscal 2011 spending. We've been hearing debate on the environment section of the bill. Other areas deal with Homeland Security, agriculture, foreign operations, and the Transportation Department. What do you think? Where should those cuts happen? What programs? Republicans, you can call 202-585-3885. Democrats, 202-585-3886. And all others, independents, 202-585-3887. While we wait for you to call in, here's an update on where things stand on the spending bill.
And joining us to talk about this is John Shaw of Market International. And John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This afternoon. Well, as the House is turning its attention this afternoon to the CR, the proposed funding resolution to keep the government operating through to September, how's that debate going so far?
Well, I think chaotic might be the operative word. I mean, this is very unusual to have such an open process on a spending bill, and they're trying to, as you say, pass the funding bill for the 2011 fiscal year, which began October 1st of last year and it runs to September 30th of this year. They're way behind, and they're trying to basically pass a bill prior to the current bill expiring on March 4th. So the House is trying by the end of the week to pass its bill. They're trying to cut about $60 billion from last year's spending level, and as you said, there's going to be votes on a number of amendments over the next day or so, trying to cut that number even further.
So last we heard this morning, there were about 600 amendments filed to the bill. Why so many amendments? Most of these are coming from Republicans, and the bill's written by Republicans.
Right. Well, I think this is just part of the sort of the dominant narrative that has unfolded since the election. Republicans ran heavily on the theme of cutting spending. You have a lot of new members who are getting their first chance to show that they're serious about cutting spending. So I think there was almost a pressure to introduce as many amendments as possible to cut spending. I think there's a general expectation that that the leadership will make some conversations and have that number cut back dramatically. So I would be very surprised if there are more than a couple dozen votes on amendments. But as you say, there are hundreds that have been filed so far.
When can we expect a final passage vote, and will it pass in the House?
I think it will pass. I think it will likely pass by the end of this week. Whether it's Thursday or Friday is unclear. And I think it's largely going to be the package that was introduced, which cuts the funding level about $60 billion below the current year. So that will be what the House sends to the Senate. The Senate is off next week, but then when it returns the following week, it's likely to take up this bill, although make very, very substantial changes to it. And I think there's a general thought that they're going to probably have to pass another stopgap spending bill because, as I said, the current one expires March 4th. It seems almost impossible that the House and Senate will be able to agree on a final package before March 4th. So we may need another week-long spending bill as they try to put together a final package. But it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. You have a House Republican leadership that wants to cut spending very deeply. You have a Democratic leadership in the Senate that is much less interested in cutting as deeply, and you have a White House that has offered a veto threat to the House version of the bill.
Now, you mentioned that, again, both chambers are on a week-long recess for President's Day starting next week. Is there a clear timetable for getting a finished bill to the President?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, March 4th is a hard deadline in terms of keeping the government going, and there's been all sorts of speculation about whether an impasse would lead to a government shutdown. I think there's relatively little chance that will happen. I think it's more likely that they will pass a one-week stopgap bill to keep the government funding. But then once you get to the middle of March, I think it's going to be some really tough negotiations to see what they can finally put together for the fiscal 11 bill, because remember, this week the President introduced his fiscal year 12 spending bill, which they need to start working on before too long. So I'm assuming that by the middle of March or so, this funding level for fiscal year 11 is resolved. But it's going to be very, very difficult because you have House Republican leaders who I said want to cut deeply. You have Senate Democrats who don't want to cut as deeply, and they're joined by the White House in this.
Well, has the President had anything to say about the progress of negotiations and what he'd do with a finished bill?
Well, he's been somewhat circumspect. I mean, he had a press conference yesterday where he, just said, I wanted to keep the government going and wanted to have funding levels that are adequate. Later in the day, he issued a veto threat to the version of the bill that the House Republican leadership is offering. I think he's holding back a little bit. He wants to see what the House finally passes. He wants to see what that the Senate passes, and I think at that point he would maybe jump into the negotiations more directly. But right now I think he's just kind of sitting back and waiting to see what each of the two chambers can pass.
John Shaw of Market News International, we thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Our first call is from an independent from Roseville, California. What do you want to cut from the budget for 2011?
Well, I think personally that our government and our congressional leaders are out of control and out of hand because of all the spending that they're doing, and they want to restrict all the other spendings just in case. Just for instance,
Go ahead.
The reading of the Constitution that wasted a few $1 million of the taxpayers' money. Then they wanted to talk about, putting in the old Ms.
I think that you're hearing yourself on the television. You need to turn that down. Can you do that quickly?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But anyways, our congressional leaders wasted so much money doing ridiculous amount of, how do you say, it's just ridiculous what they're doing.
Well, do you have some specific ideas about what to cut from the federal spending this year?
Well, they shouldn't have our congressional leaders waste their time on who the mascot of Mississippi should be, or what the mascot gun should be, or the state gun should be, or, all of those have been wasting so much of our money that people don't see it. It's just, I have no understanding of why people don't see all these waste of money.
Susan, a Republican from Ohio. Hi,
Yes.
Susan. Go ahead.
Hello. Department of Education, Department of Commerce should be done away with.
Why?
Total waste of time, total waste of money, just busy work.
Well, how do you think that they should, the country should govern education?
I think it should be left up to the states.
Judy, a Democrat. What do you think?
I've just got one comment, and if Democrats, Republicans, and the President is really interested in cutting the debt and the deficit, then maybe we should stop paying our congressmen and our senators when they are voted out of office or they choose to retire. Maybe we shouldn't be paying their salaries for the rest of their lives. I understand that Representative John Kyle is fixing to retire in 2012, not going to run again. He's going to get $137,000 a year from taxpayers, even though he's no longer representing the taxpayers in office. And I think if they started taking away the salaries, show me in the original Constitution that says we have to continue paying our senators and our congresspeople for the rest of their lives simply because they served some time serving the people. I mean, that's a lot of money that could be put towards our debt and our deficit, is to stop paying them when they no longer represent us in the Senate or the Congress.
Sorry for cutting you off there. Morris, Illinois. Joanne.
Yes, I definitely feel that we should use our oil, our gas, things that we can use, and possibly go to the plants that are I can't say it. I'm sorry. At any rate, our nuclear plants, I definitely feel we should do that. The people in Europe have done this, and they're sustained with power. I can't see why we can't do this. Also, I feel the teachers should be paid by the states and certainly not by the federal government.
Something about the nuclear sites in the bill would block the administration from terminating plans for a nuclear waste site at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Our next call is Jasper. Hello.
Yeah, nice to be C-SPAN. How you doing? Yeah, I would just think on some cutting some spending would be for the fair tax to be enacted. I guess that's H.R. 25. and you know, get rid of the IRS and everybody just pay taxes on what they buy.
Sam, you're a Democrat from Jamestown, New York.
Yes. I just wonder how much they're really going to save on doing this. Why don't they tell us what they're spending of our tax money overseas and cut it by 10% a year? I think that would settle everything if they put the money back into the United States, and people would be a lot happier with that.
A quick look at the numbers. The stopgap funding bill provides $1 trillion for the federal agencies for the last 7 months of fiscal 2011. That's from March 4th through September 30th. It's $61 billion less than fiscal 2010 spending and $100 billion less than the president asked for. We're taking a call now from Rachel, an independent.
Yes. Hello. Well, I think cuts should be made for big oil. They should stop subsidizing big oil. They should, I agree with most of the Republicans when they said to cut the funding for the Mexico sewer line. I think that shouldn't be happening. We have a lot more of our own infrastructure to take care of versus theirs over there. They are a capable government, and we need to start making them support their own people. And the nuclear situation, you know, is borderline, but I think it should be cuts there. No cuts for seniors, no cuts for the middle class, and definitely do not cut social programs for the poor, because then that's all that's going to do is make middle class Americans have to come out and pay the bill anyway. You know, if we cut these programs, the taxpayer is going to be on the hook no matter what, and America needs to realize that, and American people need to realize that. This is the way this country was built. That's what Social Security is all about, paying into the program so our children and our grandchildren can have a better situation when they become the leaders of this country.
There are 5 votes in this series. Right now, the House voting on an amendment that would reduce the money for land acquisition by the Bureau of Land Management by $2,750,000 and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by more than $15 million. Here's the sponsor of the amendment, Representative Loomis of Wyoming, from earlier during debate. Then we'll take more of your calls.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In December, I voted for that historic agreement between President Obama and Congress to keep American taxes low and to extend unemployment benefits. And now we're here to debate how to pay for that. And I have an idea about how to help pay for that. My amendment, number 193, would strike the remaining funding for this 6 months in this year, totaling $35 million from the budgets of the U.S. Fish.
We're having some technical problems with that video from debate from earlier. We're going to take another call now. Christian, hello, you're from Houston, Texas.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. So what do you think? What do you think we should cut from fiscal 2011 spending?
Well, there is some difficulty in the government in deciding on what we should be spending government money on and what we don't need to be spending government money on. First off, my mother is a school teacher herself, and she goes through a difficulty. You don't get that well benefits. It's not that great to be a school teacher when you're teaching the people of who's going to run this country one day. And for them not to be paid what they deserve and what they need, it's not right. And the main government can't really decide on what the state law should be and what it should be for a single person or a single teacher in a single state. First off, when it comes to the government, there should be a setup set for. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead. Finish your comment.
Yes. There should be a regulation on what government is spending is done with. First off, when it comes to the Bush tax cuts, there should not be, it's not right to be giving separate companies these huge tax cuts that we give them. Instead, for the industries and stuff that are supplied in other countries, there should be tax cuts given to those who move their companies back over into America and supply more American jobs. Supplying more American jobs here allows for government money to be spent well. So I think it's more important that if we put our money together, instead of bickering between two different sides, putting our money towards one fund and having American companies move over here instead of giving them tax breaks for not doing anything at all, instead not hiring more people and keeping the same amount. There should also be a regulation and control over our government borders. Putting people back where they belong and controlling the government system allows for Americans to have the jobs that are lost due to illegal immigrants.
That was Christian, Republican from Houston. Now we're going to go see Representative Loomis again from Wyoming from debate from earlier on her amendment that the House is voting on right now.
And Wildlife Service, the BLM, and the Forest Service for the purpose of buying new federal land. There are many alternatives to buying land with cash that would allow them to continue using Yankee ingenuity. And those include land exchanges. In my own state, we have over 500,000 acres that have been designated for disposal by federal agencies because these lands don't fit into good land management. And yet there are other lands that these same federal agencies would like to acquire. They can do exchanges. They can do sales of this land that's designated for disposal and purchase other lands that work better for the fragmented land ownership patterns that we sometimes experience in the West. This is a much better alternative to using $35 million to pay cash to buy new land that adds to the management base and responsibility. At the same time, it would free up land that would be disposed of for people to buy and begin to earn a living on. So this is a way to create jobs, not to burden the federal government, and to recognize that good stewardship and good conservation can be practiced by good federal and private partnerships. And those are the opportunities that are available if we adopt this amendment. It saves the taxpayers money. It helps pay for those unemployed people on unemployment benefits. And this is a win-win amendment. It's only a moratorium, and when we begin the next fiscal year, we would have an opportunity to having reviewed projects between the Natural Resources Committee and the Interior Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee and have a better understanding of the ultimate goal of our land acquisitions programs within these federal agencies. Madam Chairman, I urge adoption of the amendment.
That was Representative Loomis, the sponsor of the amendment that the House is voting on right now. Our next call is from Easton, Pennsylvania. Ron.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm calling regards to the spending bill. Every time they come up with a budget and they're spending, they want to cut Social Security, they want to go after Medicare, Medicaid, and, you know, the working man pays for that all his working life. And as it stands now, even your seniors are paying $98.50 a month out for Medicare. They're paying out supplemental money to supplemental insurance companies to cover what Medicare don't pay. They're paying prescription drug co-pays, and they pay the premium on that. The first thing they want to do is go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I don't see where that does anything.
Well, Ron,
good.
what do you think they should cut from the federal spending so that the deficit goes down?
Well, there's a lot they could cut off of there like giving out billions of dollars in aid to other countries and giving out money to other different sources that are not worth it. They're not creating anything to bring money back into this country. Your jobs are all running overseas. That's where your money's going. I believe they ought to work on small business and then, just like the bureaucracy down there, cut some of their pay.
Taking a call now from Florida. Nigel?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. My name is Nigel, and yeah, we're in big trouble. I mean, you know, we're so far in debt right now, and you know, China and Russia, they're just sitting around laughing at us. You know, they're just sitting around waiting for the next opportunity to, you know, get in our heads and do something. And we really need to put that money towards protecting our coastlines and, you know, just protecting our country. And we're so focused on what's going on, you know, in other places that we need to be more focused on what's going on here in the country. And I think that, you know, a lot of people are distracted with the media. And, you know, Hollywood, I keep thinking to myself, where are they getting all this money from? And where are we getting all this money to all these FEMA camps that are all over the country that are fully operational but empty? And it makes me think, you know, to myself that, you know, I'm very disappointed, but I think to myself that we're in big trouble.
Charles, a Republican from Pennsylvania. You could be our last caller. Go ahead, Charles.
Yes. First, I'd like to make a statement. I think one of the biggest mistakes that has been made here in the last few years is when they let the school teachers unionize. That was absolutely a mistake because our schools have gone down drastically from what they used to be. It was the first job that I ever had. And I was making about $2,000 a year. That wasn't very much.
Charles, can you finish your comment because this vote is almost over. The numbers are going down.
Okay, but they should not pay all of these teachers that much money, and they're not. And our school system is not what it used to be. The teachers aren't as qualified. They're out there for the money. It's not for the job that they want to do. I think that the teachers, when I was growing up, most of the teachers were women, because especially in grade school, because they dealt with the children. And
okay, I want to thank Charles for his call. Going to get back to the floor now. Amendment voting continues on a measure to fund the federal government for the rest of this fiscal year.
On this vote, the yeas are 213, the noes are 216. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 338, printed in congressional record and offered by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 338, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Moran of Virginia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This amendment, offered by Congressman Moran, the Democrat from Virginia, it would increase funding in the bill to $50 million for the North American Wetlands Conservation Fund. House expecting another late night tonight, wading through amendments about 600 have been submitted. Congressional Quarterly writing that House appropriators are working on an agreement to speed consideration of legislation. Republicans trying to whittle down the hundreds of amendments. GOP leaders have said that they want to finish work on the spending for this year by Thursday afternoon. That's tomorrow afternoon.
On this vote, the yeas are 73, the noes are 352, with 2 members voting present. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 376, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 376, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This amendment would reduce funding for the EPA for science and technology by $64 million. There are 2 more amendment votes after this one. Other spending in the bill, other spending cuts in the bill, a Food and Drug Administration budget would decline by 10%. And spending would also fall by 10% for the WIC program, the government's principal nutrition program for pregnant women and children.
this vote, the yeas are 199, the noes are 230. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 84, printed in the congressional record and offered by the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 84, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Amendment votes continue in the House on fiscal 2011 spending for the federal government. The Associated Press reporting that President Obama won a showdown earlier today on one of those votes to kill a $3 billion alternative engine for the Pentagon's next-generation fighter jet. The vote was 233 to 198. The Associated Press continues, writing that the move was a loss for House Speaker John Boehner of Ohio, whose state reaped thousands of jobs from the engine built by General Electric and Rolls-Royce. One more vote expected in this series.
On this vote, the yeas are 239, the noes are 185. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 379, printed in congressional record and offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 379, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Reed of New York.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
More amendment debate after this vote, expected to go late tonight. A look ahead to what may happen if the House passes this bill and it moves to the Senate. Reuters writing that Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Daniel Inouye lashed out at the House bill, signaling that he would kill it before it could reach President Obama's desk, saying, quote, "Many of the reductions proposed by the House were made not because programs were ineffective or wasteful, but out of a desire to meet an arbitrary dollar figure cited during the political campaign." That's from Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Daniel Inouye.
vote. The yeas are 228. The noes are 203. The amendment is agreed to. Committee will come to order. We think another